I was real little. I actually sought rescue in Christianity from what I saw in the sky, as seeing what in the sky, what I conceived of as an evil face, an evil deity or demiurge. That I wanted the reassurance that there was a benign deity more powerful. And my priest actually said, that perhaps I should become a Lutheran because I seemed to actually sense the presence of Satan.
Oh. Hey, dickheads! Like a pink laser beam of truth beaming from the actual VALIS satellite to your brain hole. We are your personal dickheads, here to talk about a classic of Philip K. Dick's canon. Whether we like it or not, we're going to be talking about VALIS, which I've got here, my Sci-Fi Masterworks edition. And we have a special guest dickhead here today. We have a truant dickhead who will be joining us late. Yes, the vintage edition. So I am David Agranoff, your host, co-host here today. I am a science fiction author, critic, and researcher. And I recently put out a book called Nightmare City that I recommend to people that was co-written with the guy who's late for the show, who will be joining us later, Anthony Trevino. And this book, we pitched it as The Wire if young Philip K. Dick and Clive Barker were on the writing staff. So Nightmare City. And then I'm just going to put that back here. Langhorne J. Tweed, tell them who you are.
I'm Langhorne J. Tweed.
And joining us from the Bay Area, ready to rock out. He's going to play drums for us later, Mr. David Gill.
Hey.
Gil, tell the folks who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm an independent scholar studying Phil Dick for the last 20 goddamn years or so, and I ran the Total Dickhead for a while, which is a blog, totaldickhead.com, and done a bunch of stuff. I got on today my Phil Dick, can you see this? My Phil Dick Alice Cooper mashup tee from the OCs.
Nice.
So I'm empowered with that. And VALIS is...
I feel like my taco shirt doesn't match up.
Oh, there you go. Look at that.
Indiana University. Go. That's all I got.
I'm here to defend the supposition that VALIS is Phil Dick's high watermarks, best novel he wrote.
All right. Well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I know, right? Don't at me.
Well, if you're a longtime listener, viewer of the Dickheads, you will recognize Mr. Gill because this is his third appearance on the show.
Hey.
Yeah, he was with us for We Can Build You, and also I did a separate interview where we just chatted. Gill is one of our favorite guests, and we're always happy to have him around to talk about Philip K. Dick. And so we're going to start, like we always do, with the Philip K. Dick news. And he's still not with us, so that's the first thing. So
he hasn't come back.
Not yet. But it is a death that is the first piece of news, which is the death of Ray Nelson at 91 years old, who we covered on this podcast before as the co-author of the Ganymede Takeover, the first person to co-author a book of two, to co-write a book with Phil before Roger Zelazny. Although I think Roger Zelazny and Phil's book was started, I think Deus Irae was started before Ganymede.
Didn't it take like 14 years for them to write that thing or something?
Well, yeah, I think it took 14 years to just get the time set aside for Roger to do it. I don't think it took him that long when he actually
to actually write it,
Yeah. So Ray Nelson was important. Mr. Gill, do you want to give a thumbnail of the relationship that Ray Nelson and Phil had?
Yeah, well, Ray Nelson's a Berkeley head, so they came up together. It's unclear whether they went to school together. There's some
Yeah, what is
agreement
up with
about
that? I
evidence,
mean,
but who cares? I think they went to school together. They were chums. They were weirdos. Ray Nelson is rumored to have invented the propeller beanie, and he was a science fictioner in his own right. His story, which is called what, David?
8 o'clock in the morning.
8 o'clock in the morning became They Live under John Carpenter's able hand and lens.
Yeah. And if you want more information, before this episode comes out, there's two things that will be happening. One is I interviewed Ray's son, Walter Nelson, about Ray Nelson, which will be in the podcast feed. Now, one thing to note is that our bonus episodes are not on the main feed. So if you use Apple Podcasts, it'll be in the PKD Heads bonus episodes, which is a separate thread or a separate. You have to subscribe to that separately. But also, Ray Nelson's celebration of life will be February in 2023, I think the 16th, at the Unitarian Church in Berkeley. So it will have happened by the time this episode comes out. But, Ray Nelson was one of Phil's really good friends. And we go into this a little bit in the interview, but there are theories out there, for example, that Ray Nelson did the final edits on the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch because Phil claimed he was too terrified to read it again. And
I think that means he proofed the galleys. That's the way I read that.
Yeah.
I met Ray Nelson 20 some odd years ago at a Berkeley screening of the documentary The Gospel According to Philip K. Dick. And even then, as a young greenhorn, I was convinced I was going to write a biography of Phil Dick, which 20 years later I still haven't written. And I went up to Ray Nelson, I introduced myself, and I said, I'm going to write a biography of Phil Dick one day. And he said, can't be done. Never told the same story twice to two different people. And that's proven to be a fairly accurate statement.
Yeah, right.
So, file that away as a W for Ray Nelson. He was correct on that.
And if people haven't read the story, 8 o'clock in the morning that became They Live, it's a much darker story than the movie. And it's very good. And there's like 18 versions on YouTube read by audio narrators. And they're like, I think a lot of people use it as a sample because it's a very short and effective story. But it's out there. But Ray Nelson was very important to Phil and to his life, and most of the people who were his friends all said Ray was a really great guy. He also, one thing we should note on Ray Nelson, the inspiration for a very important character in Phil's canon, which Roy Batty in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep was allegedly based on him, which we had fun talking about that in the interview with his son. So
they describe him as disheveled and having like stains all over his shirt. That's the thing that makes him like Ray Nelson, is what I could get from reading it.
Well, one thing that's interesting, if you listen to the interview, he talks about his writing room that was an addition on their house, and they called it the Ivory Tower because you had to go up into the. And in one of those documentaries, the interview with Ray Nelson is shot. I think it's the Penultimate Truth documentary is shot inside the Ivory Tower, and you can see what a crazy, amazing looking office full of papers and things. And his son is still going through those. So
all right, let's move on.
All right. Ray Nelson, 91 years old. So yeah. All right. So the next piece of Philip K. Dick news that I think was important is that the New York Times did an article that was in the Sunday book section as a primer on Philip K. Dick novels.
Really?
And in October of this year. And it's interesting because it's a lot of Ubik and Man in the High Castle. So clearly there's two people at least on this video call who might have been a better person to write it, but New York Times ain't calling us. So, but it's interesting. Did anybody else look at that?
Yeah, I went through it. I thought it was a pretty good, I mean, it's not a deep, no deep cuts, but I thought it was a pretty good way to introduce Dick. And the idea that, he's in the New York Times, so you ought to read him and take him seriously is certainly a nice boon.
Yeah. Yeah. That's about what I thought about it. Yeah. Now, the last thing was going to seem self-serving for two of us. However, if this was anybody else who wrote these articles, we would be mentioning them anyways. But both Gil and I published articles with Tor.com on Philip K. Dick related themes. And David Gill's article, Within You, Without You, Philip and Jane Dick. Do you want to tell everybody about this article that you wrote real quick?
Well, I was inspired by the news that Charlize Theron is working with, God, I can't remember his name, the director of Children of Men.
Alfonso Cuarón?
Something like that. And they are developing, they're developing a project based on Phil's twin sister, who died at 6 weeks of age. And the pitch is that I guess Charlize Theron is going to play this sister who's in some universe where she survived, and she's always getting her crazy brother out of these jams and pickles, which sounds kind of amazing. I'm there for it. Good. And so I went for Tor. I decided to go back and basically collect all that we knew about Phil and his sister, and really his lifelong obsession with her and twins, which shows up in VALIS as that sort of cosmic twin that one of them died, and all of that. So it's a really nice collection of both what we know biographically and then how he wove the theme of twins into his fiction.
Yeah, also on there is the article I wrote, and my article was on the Philip K. Dick themes in the Apple TV series Severance, directed by Ben Stiller, which is my favorite non-Star Trek show of last year altogether. And it's collectively the show that Carrie and I most enjoyed together, was Severance. We quote Severance quite often because it's a excellent satire of office life. And, Carrie is fond of talking about her job, saying that's some severance bullshit right there. Right. And so it's really great. Like the whole show is about this, about a office where your home life and your office life are separated by a chip in your brain. So you don't know about your home life, and your office life doesn't know about the opposite. And everything in the office is all designed around, crunching numbers and earning a waffle party. When the trailer for the series came out, it immediately made me think of Philip K. Dick, obviously, because of the memory manipulation. And so when the series was over, I got the idea that it would be a good way to break down like all the themes. And it's a very long article, and I reference about maybe 24, maybe 30 different Philip K. Dick novels in one article. So anything about Philip K. Dick on the Tor website is the hub of modern science fiction is good. So anyways, I hope people, if they haven't checked out those articles, will check out those articles. So but that's it for the Philip K. Dick news. So we're going to get to talking about this book that was published in the year 1981.
David, what was happening in the year 1981 other than me going to a chocolate factory?
Well, apparently Langhorne went to a chocolate factory. Well, that's funny because, when we started this show and we were doing what was happening in 1955, this is like really where we're getting to the point where I actually can remember what was happening at these times, right? So 1981 was the year the AIDS virus was identified. It was the end of the Iran hostage crisis. Post-it notes were invented. And I know you're all very happy about that.
It was the beginning of the Reagan era. I mean, how joyful was that?
Exactly. And punk rock was never the same. Anwar Sadat was assassinated.
When Phil Dick heard that Anwar Sadat had been assassinated, crushed up a Coke can and cut his arm with the sharp edge. This is because Greg Rickman went to interview him around that time, and Phil had his arm was all cut up. He said, "What happened?" And in the shock and pain of hearing about that assassination, he basically did a kind of cutting, which is pretty gnarly. Anyway,
and
we're gonna add that to the tidbit to the pile there.
That's why we got you here.
That's right. It's my job.
And the first flight of the space shuttle, and of course, the most interesting thing of 1981 that everyone is so excited to talk about, the royal wedding, right? But anyways, yeah, that was 1981. So, yeah, I mean, I was in first grade, so I remember a little bit about 1981. But, yeah, so the VALIS Incident. Now, we've already talked about the VALIS Incident, and we'll, of course, talk a little bit about the inciting incident that happened to start this whole thing in 1974, but we already covered it. And that episode is with Bill Cyril, Tessa Dick, and Ted Hand, and talking about the actual incident that happened. And so, unless it relates directly to the novel, we're not going to drill deep on the actual incident. We will, of course, because he's writing about it. But, and then there's two aspects that we need to get into that we didn't dive into too deep in the VALIS Incident episode. But for those who don't know, that was March 18th through the 20th of 1974. And I've flexed on this before, but I was born March 19th. So when, which Tessa made a joke that I have Valis rising in my astrological sign. And then, so that's when that happened. And he was living in Orange County, specifically in Santa Ana. It's a 5-minute, his apartment building is still there, and it's a 5-minute walk from the train station. So
you get the picture? I sent you a picture of it. You want?
I've got the picture. Let me pull that up. Yeah, there it is. And
this is from Eric Davis's book. I forget what it's called, but it's about mystical places in California. It's a coffee table book.
Really?
Yeah, it's really good. I'll get the name of it for you.
Yeah, and so just a thumbnail of what happened there at the top of the steps there is that Phil had had a tooth removed and was waiting for a delivery of pain meds because they were going to have, the pharmacy was delivering them. And when they showed up, there was a sticker on the window of the door. And when the woman showed up with it, she allegedly had a Jesus fish pendant on. And the way Phil told the story to most people was that the light reflected off the fish pendant, but Tessa says it was the sticker in the window of the door. And when the light reflected, that was when Phil claimed the pink laser beam with all the information from God was downloaded into his brain.
Wait, so he was all hopped up on sodium pentothal at that time?
Yeah.
Yep. You didn't know that?
And he's saying that he had his wisdom teeth removed. Who has their wisdom teeth removed in their 40s?
Yeah, right. If you're in your 40s, you should.
So what you've got to get, this is a really important point I want to be making throughout our broadcast today, is that Phil Dick is shaping the narrative of what happened to him in order to make it both a good story as fiction and convincing to people, ultimately to buy into his experiences. And I really believe the novel is structured rhetorically to convince you that what happened to him was real.
Right. So, so here at the top of the stairs, this is where it all kind of started. And so we're going to get into the writing and publication history of everything that went on with this. But what we do know is that through this era, there was a lot of people who thought that Phil had slowed down writing fiction, and that is mostly because he was writing his exegesis, which was the the religious thoughts and teachings that kind of the spiritual revelation. Now, if you talk to the people in Phil's life, right, depending upon where they come from in their views, like if you talk to Ray Nelson, who was an atheist, right, and his friend, and Phil would kind of shape the story for Ray, like to be a little less God, when he talked about it, than he would if he talked to Bill Cyril, who is a very spiritual person. So if you talk to Bill, as we did in our episode, he sees it as a genuine religious experience, that this is normal, that people throughout history have had these revelations, and that Phil is just the latest person who has had this kind of spiritual revelation. He just happened to be a science fiction writer. He just happened to be this person, but he's had this genuine thing. Now, if you talk to Ray Nelson, he might have told you he was a prankster, or that he liked to tell these kinds of stories, or he was creating this novel and he was making this story up this way. Now, who's to say what's right or what's wrong or what's true? Like, there's a certain degree. When I did the VALIS Incident episode, I made the decision that I was going to take it on face value as to what Phil said, right? But right. You've got three skeptics here, so just know that this episode is going to be heavily skewed towards skepticism of the VALIS Incident, that we see it more as he was telling a story.
It's fiction, yeah.
Well, I think something happened to him, and I think something happened to him that he really wanted to believe was a mystical experience. And so that's the way I think to frame it, is that he's not made up out of whole cloth,
Right. I know what you're saying, that he was inviting that kind of experience. So
yeah, and it's important. I think
sort of made it happen, but it's a real experience to him.
Well, he's cast every experience in his life. He's cast multiple ways. I shouldn't say that. All of the major events in his life, he told stories about theatrically,
right,
and varying the details, varying the script, telling it different versions. That's just part of his style. What Cleo told me is that was really a part of their identity, as when they considered themselves beats, living in beatniks, living in Berkeley. That basically the idea was there is no truth. You're always embellishing anyway, so why not take it to the extreme?
Right.
All right. Now, one of the things that came out of this is that once he had this revelation, or had this incident at the house, and I'm going to stop sharing that picture. I think we've shown it enough for our YouTube people. Is that over the next couple years, he was writing various versions of his ideas that came to him during this, and those have been collected mostly into the exegesis, and which David, you worked on part of the. You want to tell people your experience with the exegesis?
Well, I like to say that I wrote the footnotes on the book that was a footnote in the life of the author, who was himself a footnote in the history of science fiction. It's footnotes all the way down.
On footnotes.
But essentially, the idea, really spearheaded by Jonathan Lethem, was that people wanted to read the unexpurgated ramblings of Phil Dick that he collected in the series of folders. And there's no real serious way to know the archaeology of what we're looking at. So it's very difficult to know when these folders start and end, and whether they're in the right order and all that kind of stuff. But it's a huge manuscript where you get the sense that Dick was pathologically driven to write about what happened as a method to understand.
And
The exegesis, I have it right here. It's beautiful. If you're a dickhead and you haven't read it, you should check it out from your library and see if you want it. It's a challenge. It's a wild ride. But the footnotes that me and a bunch of other great Dick scholars wrote are a real boon, and there's a lot of good stuff in here. So it's definitely an interesting text.
that will be the finale episode of our podcast, actually. Technically.
You guys are gonna read that thing, man.
I didn't know we were doing that.
Yeah, it's not a novel, right?
I guess we could technically get out of it if we wanted to.
No, we'll do something on it, I'm sure. I mean, I might not be involved, but we'll do something on it.
There's an interesting undercurrent here. So is some of this philosophical and religious rambling not as pleasurable to read as straight sci-fi for you guys?
Yeah, no, not as interesting.
Well, no, it depends. It depends on how it's written. I mean, the way at least the exegesis parts that we read in the novel were not very interesting to me.
Oh,
Yeah.
why not? Just curious.
Well, we'll get there. We'll get
Okay,
there.
all right.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah, we'll get there. We're gonna talk about the novel more later.
Okay.
So what ended up happening is he wrote how many pages? Like 800 pages of the exegesis. It's around.
Well, what it says in there is thousands of pages.
Yeah.
So I found this part. This is super important to my whole point. In the exegesis, they have three different main parts to the way the book is published. These are just excerpts. We had to figure out kind of what to publish. So part 3 is folder 9, December 1978. I'm sure you can't read this. The footnote says, first 6 pages of folder 9 consist of manuscript pages from VALIS. Coming thousands of pages into the exegesis, they cut like a knife. Where did this voice come from? One almost expects the handwriting to be different, but it isn't. Equally disconcerting is that in the midst of these passages that end up almost word for word in the published novel, Dick breaks into exegesis again to briefly explore one of his multiple time track models of 374. So the narrative as it exists around this experience in the biography of Sutton's and in this exegesis is that Dick really struggled to fictionalize the experience of 2374. And he tried multiple times. He drafted Return to VALIS System A or something like that, which ended up being Radio Free Album. It comes out in '85. You'll read that.
Yeah, we'll get into all that here in a little bit. Yeah,
But that's the.
So the biography is that in December of '78, Dick is freaking out. He owes a book to some publisher. He's already been paid the advance. He doesn't know what he's going to write. He's struggling to throw 2374 into the mix and make something that works as fiction out of it. And the way the narrative is structured is, boom, like a bolt of lightning, suddenly in December 1978, he gets the idea and he can go forward. Sutton says this is where he developed the idea of splitting himself into two so that he could look at the experience, but that's wrong. He already wrote Radio Free Album Youth where he splits himself into two. So my point would be, no matter what happened, the narrative in his biography and in this text of the exegesis that we're supposed to understand is that suddenly, almost like a revelation, he was able to
some kind of epiphany.
Throw this book together. Epiphany is the perfect word to use, right? And again, that as part of the narrative works to persuade us as readers that this is all real. Right? Another important point to come to is like, okay, this guy had a revelation. What kind of a revelation takes 6 years and like multiple drafts of trying to figure out to like craft to set out into the world?
It doesn't seem like a revelation.
Right? Well, it's an interesting revelation where it's important that Phil Dick himself is a great writer and a great communicator because then he can help, he's the only one. Again, my point would be there's so much narcissism in this fantasy. Right? That you are the chosen one by God and you're going to save the entire world from from being insane, right? That's crazy. That's really, really narcissistic. And that's key because I really feel like this, era in Dick's life, he felt like a has-been. He felt like a never was. He was determined.
So this is more him propping himself up than anything else.
That's part of. I mean, that's really the one of what I think is the core,
which he does kind of talk about in the novel.
Yeah. He does, and that's to his credit.
Yeah,
right? That he's not pathological to the point of not getting it.
But he's pathological in the sense that he inflates the bad side of himself constantly. But two. We'll talk about that, I'm sure, later on.
Yeah, we're gonna get into the writing more of the writing of the books.
Oh, what else you got, David?
But we need to talk about Xerox Missive and Thomas.
Oh, I do have a question about the exegesis. Was it written in like loose leaf, or was it in journals, or you say
it was?
Yes.
Started out typed.
Okay.
Started out, he was writing these letters to this Claudia Bush, I think.
Claudia Bush, yeah.
And he's collecting the carbons for those in a separate file.
Okay.
And the way I read it is then he starts wanting to kind of riff on what he's writing to Claudia in his kind of own private notes, all typed.
Okay.
At some point, maybe months or years into the process, he moves to handwritten. And if
still
you look at
loosely?
the exegesis, you can
Still
see
loosely.
the difference. It's the longhand, right?
Yeah.
So that's the real challenge, is looking at the longhand and trying to figure out what the hell he's saying.
Oh, wow.
And, but it also it becomes more frenetic. It becomes more like spastic, for lack of a better word. Like he's just going ham, as my kids like to say. You know?
Ham and biscuits. Yeah.
So there's two things we need to talk about before we get into the writing and publication history more intensely, which is the Xerox Missive episode, which I know Gil wanted to talk about, which is that this happens when a letter postmarked from Austria with no return address arrives at the apartment. And
okay, that one. Okay.
Yeah, and it's mentioned in the novel, but this is a thing that Phil claims happened in real life, and that he was afraid that it had what he called die words in it that would immediately kill him when he read it. So he asked Tessa to read it, which is
Tessa talks about this too, right?
Yeah.
They were big into the Manchurian Candidate. I don't know if you've ever seen that. If you've never have it,
I've seen both versions and like both of them.
Fantastic. So for Phil, I mean, that was like a lifelong fear that after he saw that film, it really coalesced for him, that the idea of like a piece of information, a secret word or whatever could be the
trigger
to something. Yeah.
MK Ultra kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't know. I don't have a ton on this letter other than that I just think it's a really important part of the story that's separate. That the fact that he felt that this happened, that he was afraid of it, that, and then we'll talk about its role in the novel when we get there as a part of the narrative. But just so people know, this was a real thing,
real life event.
Yeah. And I mean, it's one of the things that makes VALIS a hard read for me is that you can't really separate the real life events from if you know a lot about Phil. For me, it's impossible to separate these things that happen in real life. Now, the other thing that's really important, and this is almost more important to Flow My Tears, is Thomas, the Christian martyr from the 1st century, which is this character that that Phil felt like was a real person or somebody he was in touch with or that he was communicating with through telling these stories. And
initially thought it was Bishop Pike, right? His buddy, the kind of.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And he talks about that in the exegesis. And then eventually it became this different personality, somebody who'd lived of a distant past and so forth.
Yeah. And so Thomas is this Christian martyr character. And
I have a question. I have a question real quick. What was Phil's tie to Hinduism and reincarnation, Buddhist You know,
oh, he's huge into the Bardo, the Tibetan Book of the Dead.
Really?
Yeah, huge into it to the point where it's in Ubik and it's in a couple short stories.
Yeah, it's mentioned in those, but I mean, he goes deep into reincarnation in this novel, and I was curious as to like if he's trying to do this sort of Christian thing, which is definitely anti-reincarnation.
I don't think it's reincarnation. It's this stuff about how people from the past are like retro-scribed into the DNA of like, that in addition to the genetic ancestry, we have a kind of a cultural genetic ancestry that's also coded into the DNA.
Yeah, right.
It's not reincarnation. It's
genetic memory and all that stuff.
Exactly. Information transfer, something like more like Lamarckian.
But he does write it as reincarnation. It's in a sense, he's writing like I was this person in the past. That person is it. Well, yeah, you're right. It might not be. Maybe I read that wrong.
It's not the sense of like I was born as Thomas and I lived his whole life. It's more like
that's a person that's in my head. More like a genetic memory.
Suddenly I'm seeing through Thomas's eyes. I'm seeing Rome in 48 or whatever it is. Yeah.
Yeah, and so he kind of comes up with this idea too that Thomas is like a muse for him to be composing pieces like Flow My Tears or the Valis trilogy or whatever. And in a weird way, like,
and this is in real life. He's doing this.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And
not just in the novel.
Yeah, this is something that he's kind of thinking and feeling. Is a thing that's going on. And let me see.
A really important text is the origin of consciousness. In the breakdown of the bicameral mind by Julian James, which is all about like how primitive man had a kind of like inner dialogue, and how one half of that dialogue was kind of ascribed to God.
Really?
And how if you think about like what Phil Dick is doing here, it's sort of similar. Like he's endlessly having these sort of dialogues where he's like, do I think this? No, I think that. What about this? What about that? And it's a bicameral interpersonal dialectic.
Right.
So the actual writing of this novel happened in October to November of 1978, pretty quick. The last thing he worked on before this was the introductions for the Best of Philip K. Dick collection, and then he would follow this up with Divine Invasion, which we will follow this up with. And Valis System A was completed 2 years earlier, August 19th, 1976. That was sent to his agency, and that became Radio Free Albemuth.
Oh, okay.
And but it was originally called Valis System A.
So are there 4 Valis books?
3.
Yeah, the Radio Free Albemuth was never really probably supposed to be published since it was rejected, right. And then they suggested a massive rewrite he didn't want to do.
So, but Albemuth would be the 4th Valis book, right?
But it's not. I mean, I would read it as a draft of like a failed attempt at Valis.
Okay.
Yeah. It's a very different novel. It's a very interesting difference, but I don't think it was, once it was rejected, I don't think Phil ever imagined it would be out there in his canon.
Yeah.
Phil not wanting to publish a book sounds weird to me.
Oh, well, but he didn't want to do the rewrite. He just wanted to write Valis instead.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah. And the publication of, he did change the title, though. We know that he agreed to the title of Radio Free Albemuth because he didn't want to confuse it with Valis, because after Valis was a success, there was...
So
Valis was a success?
At the time, yeah. Sort of. Enough that he did a sequel to it.
Well, that's true.
Yeah. And once Divine Invasions did okay, I believe that there was talk of Radio Free, but he didn't, like Gill said, he didn't want to do the rewrite. but he did agree to the title change before, because he didn't want to confuse it with VALIS. But it was originally titled VALIS System A. And so he had the contract, much like Gill said earlier. He had
Do
the
you think that
contract.
ties back to Van Vogt? Like him trying to create like his own Van Vogt kind of what's that novel that he really liked of Van Vogt?
Null A.
Null A. Is that
No,
he was
no,
trying to go for that?
No, I don't think so. No, I just think
in title, not in.
Oh yeah, the A might have been an homage. Yeah,
like a nod to Van Vogt.
A nod to it. Yeah, and he makes nods to Van Vogt constantly in the outlines. By the way.
Oh really?
Huh. Yeah. Oh yeah, all the time. So yeah, just like as shorthand, like in the outline for Zapgun, all the doppelganger characters, I didn't even know at first he was talking about doppelgangers, but he just kept calling them Null and then their character.
Oh.
And then, yeah, I felt like a pretty big nerd when I figured out what he was doing.
David, you are a big nerd.
Yes. And
are we all.
Yes. So in September of 78, before he started writing this, he had this contract for Bantam that Russ Galen got him, and it was he got a very big advance for this. And at the time, he had been spending so much time writing the exegesis that, like Gill said, he didn't know what the hell to do. And then, you already told that part of the story, Gill. So he, got on fire with, figuring out that I'm going to write it this way. And, he had this contract to fulfill, and Russ Galen was his new agent who had gotten lots of really good deals for his back catalog, but he hadn't done anything new. And so he felt a lot of pressure to do this, right? And, but a little bit more on VALIS System A. In the summer of 1976, Mark Hurst, then an editor at Bantam Books, he bought VALIS System A and suggested the revisions on the phone. And at first, Dick agreed to do them, but then, like, over time and over a succession of letters, just kept kind of like not liking the idea of doing any revisions. Those revisions never actually happened. Okay. So, but he did refer to the research he was doing in multiple letters, and he mentions it, I believe, in the exegesis, right, Gill? Like he mentions, yeah. And
so I'm still confused. Is the exegesis like a religious text, or is it a diary, or is it a combination of both?
Yeah, it's all of the above.
Yeah. Is it really?
Even weirder, when we were looking at the papers, there was a cover sheet where it said like the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, and it had his address on it, just precisely how you would make a cover sheet if you were going to submit the manuscript to the publisher.
Yeah. Okay. So he put a cover sheet on his diary.
Out by that.
Yeah.
Who puts a cover sheet on their diary?
Well, and then the other thing is, like, Tim Powers ran into him one night, and he was coming back. They lived in a similar building, and he's coming back from the incinerator, and like, hey, what were you doing? He's like, oh, I was just burning a bunch of the exegesis.
Really?
Yeah. And even weirder than that, Tim Powers found the exegesis stack of papers, and he was worried that the family or somebody was going to use them to argue that Phil Dick was non compos mentis for being in probate or whatever, and so. Tim Powers hid the stack in like the bottom of a wastebasket so nobody would find it.
So October 78 is when he began writing. The actual Galen got the manuscript on November 29th of
78.
78, yeah. So we know that he basically wrote it. So that's how we know that he wrote it in October, November.
Anthony, you missed it. We all got AIDS in 1981.
Yeah. And went to the royal wedding.
Full-blown AIDS.
Yeah. So,
Thanks for the offer, though, of, potentially giving me AIDS, Larry. It's cool. I'll pass.
Yeah. All right. Whatever.
So So another thing too is around that time he wrote an introduction to the Golden Man collection, and there's a brief piece on that story Rug, which was his first ever sale.
Yeah,
and he kind of wrote the introduction to Rug kind of in the style of Valis, which
wrote an introduction to a short story. Oh, all right.
Short story collection.
In the collection.
Okay, the collection.
Yeah.
I mean, Gaiman I've seen do short introductions to each short story, just kind of douchey in my opinion.
Here's the book right here, hardcover edition, baby.
Nice.
So I'm wondering what your guess is. What do you think Mark Hurst from Bantam thought about Valis when it came in the mail, when the manuscript came to him? Do you think he was excited? Do you think he was like, wow, this is great, Phil. I'm glad we paid you a lot of money for this.
It being Phil K. Dick, and I assume Phil K. Dick had that reputation of being weird and out there, even when he was alive. So I assume that someone would be like, I don't really get this, but all right, thanks. That's kind of what I would think.
Well, how about this? It's even worse. Because Mark Hurst, who made the deal, retired or left or went to another publisher. So it was an editor that inherited the project. Now, what do you imagine they felt? Right?
But I mean, the first
then you're getting
chapters of Valis are fucking amazing. Like, they pop. Like, they are. That's why I'm here to say this is Phil Dick's best writing. This is what he envisioned himself doing as a writer. The way it's so personal, it's so emotional, it's hitting so hard about what's going on in these people's lives and how desperate they are.
Yeah, but technically, it's not a very well put together novel.
Yeah, see, we're eventually going to argue about this, but
what? I mean, to go through the first 3 or 4 chapters are perfect. They're perfect in terms of like bringing you into
stuff about the novel. I really love. I love the splitting of the characters and fun becoming real and all that. But yeah,
we'll get to reviewing it. But Bantam was not super stoked because they expected spaceships and pew pew, and
those people can suck a dick. I mean, I don't give a shit about what your expectations are.
Russ Galen was stoked.
And he fought very hard for this book.
It gets published now. Fuck those people.
Yeah, it was originally dedicated to Tim Powers, but because Russ Galen fought so hard for the book, he changed the dedication to Russ, and Tim's already got Do Androids Dream, so I'm sure he was fine.
And of course, Tim Powers is David in the novel.
Yes, we'll get to all the.
I'm very interested as to who's who.
Yeah, we have a whole part of that plan. So
we don't have much time, David, so you better speed it up.
Okay. So basically, so he said, I thought you. Okay, so sorry, you confused me for a second. So Galen fought for it. It got published. Bantam eventually did, give him everything he wanted, but that was mostly because of the fight from Russ Galen. So that was important.
Make a joke about Bantam not being his publisher in the novel.
Yes, yeah, and
because the couple asks him, like, "Who's your publisher? Isn't it Bantam?" And he's like, "No, Doubleday." He just lies about it.
Right. So we have a few quick. We have a couple PKD quotes. Anthony, do you have the notes pulled up?
I jettisoned the first version of Valis, which was a very conventional book. That version appears in the finished book as the movie. I cast around for a model that would bring something new into science fiction, and it occurred to me to go all the way back to the picaresque, did I say that word? Novel, and have my characters be picaroons, rogues, and write it in the first-person vernacular, using a rather loose plot. I feel there's tremendous relevance in the picaresque novel at this time. Don Levy's The Ginger Man is one, so is The Adventures of Augie March by Saul Bellow. I see this as a protest form of the novel. I can't fucking remember how to pronounce that word.
Repudiation.
Oh my god, you guys, what has happened to my brain in the last year?
Hot?
Of the more structured bourgeois novel that has been so popular.
Yeah, so I think there he's trying to, pump up what he's doing with the style of the novel. But and I admit I've never heard of those other novels that he's talking about. So
I'm shocked.
Yeah. Yeah. So the next quote, Anthony, here's the puzzle.
Here's the puzzle of VALIS. In VALIS, I say, I know a madman who imagines what he saw, that he saw Christ. And I am that madman. But if I know that I am a madman, I know that in fact I did not see Christ. Therefore, I assert nothing about Christ. Or do I? Who can solve this puzzle? I say in fact only that I am mad. But if I say only that, then I have made no mad claim. I do not then say that I saw Christ. Therefore, I am not mad. And the regress begins again and continues forever. The reader must know on his own what has really been said, what has actually been asserted, but what is it? Does it have to do with Christ or only with myself? This paradox was known in antiquity. The pre-Socratics propounded it.
And that's where he's getting into the Gnostic ideas there at the end. And yeah, which is, he's doing the dance that VALIS does. Is he crazy? Is he not crazy? And and that's one of the interesting things about VALIS is, we had in my hometown, we had a guy that Electric Fred, who walked around town listening to static on his headphones and wrote in notebooks. And a lot of times I think like VALIS is a published version of this kind of thing, right? But what I like about this quote is it shows that Phil is aware of that. He's aware, to a certain degree that he's doing this. And there's only
when we were working on the exegesis, I felt the same way. I'm reading this and I'm like, this is just stupid, crazy, nuts. But these religious scholars that I was working with were like, oh my God, he's solving the blah, blah, blah. Oh my God, he's doing the blah, blah, blah. Like, this may look like, especially the religious ravings, may look completely unhinged to us. But to people who studied alchemy, occultism,
right,
all this kind of stuff,
it's I assume that. Yeah. But I'm a nihilist, so
yeah.
To me, the whole
good luck with that.
all of it is just nonsense.
Well, but it's meaning. If it has no specific granular meaning in terms of what the theory and philosophy
there is no
about,
meaning.
It means in the novel nobody can connect with Horselover Fat because he's on some other shit. That's what's important about all of those parts of the text. Is like this guy is disconnected. Nobody can reach him. My favorite scene in the whole book is when he's dealing with Maurice, the shrink. And he's like, what about God? And he's like, well, you're not thinking about God. You're thinking about Yalderbroth. And the guy's like, what the hell are you talking about? Have you ever read the Bible, right?
I love Maurice.
Yeah,
Maurice
well,
was my
he's
favorite
a real
character.
Yeah, but then, right?
Until he gets into that you need God shit.
But the next therapist says to Horselover, well, you're the expert. You would know.
Yeah.
Right? And that's all he needs to hear. Like to him, that's music to his ears because then that totally, it legitimizes all of the stuff that Horselover is wondering about and so on.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. We have one more quote from Phil, and then Anthony doesn't have to worry about reading anymore.
Really have no theory which will wrap this up. The book I'm working on for Bantam, VALIS, is really an account of this, fictionalized. I assign the experiences to a non-existent friend of mine, whom I call Nicholas Brady, and in the book, I'm a character under my own name. And I know Nicholas Brady, and he's having all these weird experiences. And I keep ripping them off to put them in a novel. I'm completely cold-blooded about it, and I'm deceiving Nicholas Brady by using the experiences in my novel, and I'm deceiving my publisher who wants a fictional work.
That's about Radio Free Album Youth.
Yeah.
That's doesn't everybody do that? rip off.
Yeah, I think pretty much.
Yeah.
That's what you're supposed to do as a novelist, as an author in general. So you rip off, an author of fiction rips off reality and puts it in a false situation.
Well, and particularly like James Joyce and F. Scott Fitzgerald and Ernest
Joyce
Hemingway.
was a newspaper guy, so he like basically translated reality. But I mean it's just I mean that's not anything different, and Dick should have known that.
Dick should have known what?
That he's just translating reality.
Yeah. All right, so that's it for the writing and publication history. That means, Mr. Tweed.
What? Oh, yeah.
Yeah. You got to remember how to do this shit.
All right, well, here we go. Here's
I'm gonna hit the bathroom.
What? Okay, go. Yeah, go for it. Go.
Smoke break.
I'll be here doing the thing with the stuff. So VALIS, vast, Albemuth,
vast active living intelligence system.
That's the one. So our book starts with our narrator, who is not defined as Philip K. Dick, but we all know it's Philip K. Dick. He says there's two things that this guy I created shouldn't do, and that is try to save people and
smoke dope.
No, what's the other one? Oh yeah,
don't smoke drugs. Dope and don't try to save people, right?
Don't do drugs, don't save people. And he manages to not do one, but really overdoes the other. So this is Dick separates himself into two people right in the first chapter: Horselover Fats and Horselover and Philip K. Dick. But he's well aware.
Greek, yeah.
He's well aware that he's separated these two people. And so he tells the story of Horselover Fat. Horselover tries to save this girl in the beginning. I should bring that up so I know names.
I believe that's Gloria.
He tries to save this girl, Gloria. Gloria dies, and Horselover Fat falls into this deep, dark depression. And in order to get himself out of this deep, dark depression, he has an epiphany from God, which is a laser beam that shoots into his head and gives him all kinds of information, such as knowing that his son has a gonad problem that needs to be fixed. And so he gets his son's gonads fixed, and he's like, "Oh my God, God is real, and I don't know how to comprehend this information that I've been given. So I'm gonna, you know what? I'm just gonna commit suicide." So he tries to commit suicide after his wife Beth leaves with that gonad son, and he's like, "Oh man, gonad son's gone. So I'm gonna take a bunch of pills, sit in my car with the engine running in the garage, and kill myself." Doesn't work. He ends up in the loony bin, and he only stays for a little while, and he makes fun of Ken Kesey for some reason while he's in there, which I'm not sure why he threw shade at Ken Kesey, but that's I
don't know, but I'm all about Gonad Son now.
So unfortunately, Gonad Son doesn't show up too much in the future. So he's talking to his friends. He strawmans Philip K. Dick, the author, the narrator, strawmans his friend Kevin, who is the only like legit atheist in the group. He's like, "Oh, you're only an atheist because you hate God." And he's like, "Yeah, of course I hate God because God is bad." And that makes him not an atheist, but whatever. So he's going through these trials and tribulations. His friends are trying to save him, and he goes to his shrink, and his shrink is like, you're trying to get with this girl, Sherry, who has cancer and is going to die, and you know she's going to die, but you're trying to save her, which you know you can't do. So why are you doing it? And he says, because I have to, basically. I mean, that's the only reason I'm living. There has to be a reason to live. Reason that there has to be a point to life, which is Horselover Fat's entire problem, is believing there's has to be a reason to be alive. A side note, I'm watching a show called Alice in Borderland, and one character asked the other, like, you've gone through all this shit, like, what makes you go on? What is the point to your existence? And he says, I don't need a point to have an existence. I don't need a point to live. There doesn't have to be a goal. There doesn't have to be anything. I survived just to survive. And to me, that was beautiful. And that's something that Horselover Fat can't see, is that you can live just to live. Anyway, so he's searching for God and all these nooks and crannies. His friend Kevin, the atheist, sees this movie that has all this shit that Horselover Fat has seen. And by this point, Philip K. Dick and Horselover Fat have become two separate people. It's no longer like an imaginary person. He's a real guy to Philip K. Dick. And they go and see the movie, and Horselover is just bent over backwards by seeing all of these things that he's experienced in this movie. And Philip K. Dick, who agrees with Horselover Fat implicitly at every turn, is like, dude, you've been so proven right. So they go and they meet with these alien people who are musicians who made the movie. And then there's this old gross dude who has all these cancerous growths on him, and he's in a wheelchair, and he's like, we should do stuff. I'm good at music. And then they go and meet the fucking savior, who's a 2-year-old who speaks far too well. So they talk to the 2-year-old kid, and then they go back and actually Phil K. Dick recombines with Fats. He becomes a whole person again. And then a couple of pages later, the kid croaks because the weird guy in the wheelchair like pokes her with a laser in her brain, and she dies. So the savior's dead. Fats is back. Everybody's happy. That's it.
All right. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the characters and who's who, because I think that's where we're.
That is very exciting stuff for me. Who's Kevin? That's what I want to know.
K.W. Jeter. Yeah, K.W. Jeter, the author. It's Jeter.
That was the character I identified the most with, you guys.
Yeah, right.
David is
that Maurice, but Maurice was Jewish.
So if you guys, this is my murder board of character names and the best page to do this on is page 28 and 29 of the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition, because this is where all the characters kind of come together. And so I've got circled. Kevin is definitely K.W. Jeter. It's funny because I circled where he first says we and put Phil and pals.
By the way, Jeter didn't want us to use his name in the exegesis. He was really pretty vociferous about that. So if you notice, I think it only says KW in there. Yeah, he's a weird dude, and he's what Tim Powers told me is that Jeter's doesn't like the fact that he looks like he bought into it.
Oh, and the novel,
or that he bought into it. Like, that's the thing. Like, Powers told me that Jeter showed him dreams that he had that also fit into the stuff. But of course, I mean, you can have dreams without having a psychic connection. You could just have somebody tells you a bunch of weird stuff, and
you're gonna dream about it. I mean, that makes sense.
And Tim Powers, if you notice on page 29, he talks about walking to David's place. Tim Powers lived in walking distance, just 2 blocks away from Phil at the time. And so that's one of the reasons why they talked often. That's one of the reasons why Tim Powers was able to save pages of the exegesis from the trash.
And Powers is, like he is in the novel, deeply religious.
Yeah.
Powers once told me that if he's Catholic, he said if Catholicism were ever proved wrong, he would become a Jew in a millisecond.
Right. And so one of the things that's cool on page 29 is that you can see there's parts where Phil is talking to Kevin and he says I, and it's like the very deliberate delineation between Horselover and Phil on this page is very interesting.
What page was that?
Huh?
What page was that?
Page 29 of the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition, and I circled where he used I here because I thought it was curious, and it shows.
It was. He doesn't do it that much until page 120. After that, so.
Yeah, and then so Sherry, the woman that had cancer, was based on Doris Saunter, who was a friend of his, who he met when she was dating Norman Spinrad, ironically enough. And then they became friends, and he wanted to marry her at some point in the cancer thing when he and Tessa were broken up, and they were already broken up.
So Tessa is Beth, right?
Tessa's Beth, yeah.
Yeah.
And then Gonad Kid is Christopher is the but
Gonad Kid.
Gonad Kid, his son Christopher. And then so he met Doris in 1972. That's when she was dating Spinrad.
Hey, that's the year we were born, David.
No, I was born in 74.
Oh,
I was born in 72.
Other David.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Sorry, I forgot. Yeah, there. So 72 is when and I think one of the things is Doris was one of the people who responded to like his religious talk because she was a serious Catholic, and she helped distribute a magazine called The Agitator, which was a liberal left Catholic newspaper, and Phil helped her.
Excuse me, what? A liberal left Catholic newspaper?
That's
man, those were the days. Those were the days.
That was the charity stuff.
Yeah, right. When they actually did good works.
Yeah.
And they went and passed out copies of The Agitator together at Cal State Fullerton. Now, this is all according to, in the Sutton biography, you can read about Doris on page 239 through like 241. And
she survived. She just died a few years ago. She lived through that cancer and lived all the way. I believe.
Oh, so she didn't die?
Huh. No, 2015 or something like that.
No,
she daughter.
Yeah, she lived. Unlike the character in the book. So, but one of the things too is that
I mean, so we have to assume that she wasn't like that character at all, right?
Yeah, just
that character was a total cunt, I think is the word that we're.
Yeah, that's right.
Here.
Who was in love with her priest?
Yeah, who like French kissed a priest or something, and
okay, so
hated everything.
So with Doris, I think
took advantage of the system.
Part of her thing that the real life Doris, not Sherry, the character, but the real life Doris felt like Phil didn't really like her, except that he wanted to take care of her, that he felt like some need to try and save her from her cancer. So part of one of the interesting things.
She was correct. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
Right. She was also friends with Tessa, and even though like Phil and Tessa were separated at the time, she like didn't like Phil like wanted to move in with her, all this other stuff. But for a while, she did live in the apartment next door to him in Santa Ana. She rented out the apartment that was
according to Tessa, in the interview that Anthony did, I mean, her and Phil were always close.
Yes.
Even when they stopped being married, they were still close.
Yeah.
Not like in the novel where she just runs off to Sacramento.
Right. And Beth is much more harshly treated than unfairly maligned if you're looking at the real life versus what happens in the novel. Much like I think a lot of the characters get a little bit of you could tell where they're based on. Now, that's important to note because we know that when he outlines characters, like in the outline for Ubik, he usually will put 3 real life people and try to combine their traits. So, yeah. So even though Roy Batty is based on Ray Nelson, there's probably other aspects of it, of the character that come from other people, so on and so forth. So
not a bad idea. I mean, not a bad way to make characters is combining other people into them.
Yeah. He also wrote an essay about
Which essay?
He wrote an essay called "The Evolution of Vital Love," which I think was about
carry that one out
about this character Doris, or about the character, the woman who inspired. Yeah, and a really Randall Radin, who's a collector, a Philip K. Dick collector, who's a fan of listens to the show and everything, sent me a message at one point.
Shout out to Randall.
Yeah. Randall bought, on page 20 of the novel, there's a little ceramic piece that was a gift.
Stephanie?
Yeah. And Randall has that actual ceramic piece. He bought it.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Oh,
yeah.
Wow.
He bought it from
who was Stephanie? Do we know?
Kathy DeMuley, I think, was the real life person.
Like the high school drug dealer.
Yeah. And she was the one that was supposed to go with Phil to Vancouver, and at the last minute sold her a ticket, probably for drugs. But that little ceramic piece was hers, and years later she sold it to Randall. So Randall
Tessa sold it. If you want to go to the Total Dickhead, there's an entry called "Oh-Ho" on sale at eBay, and it has a picture, and it's all about when Tessa was selling it.
Oh, really?
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So the sections of this book that I have separated into themes are...
You've got more people you haven't named yet.
All right.
What's the movie?
Oh, the movie is The Man Who Fell to Earth.
That's right.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Huh.
That blew their minds.
I thought it was like Xanadu or something.
No, the real life movie was Man Who Fell to Earth, which a lot of dickheads end up reading Tevis because of this.
For that one that Paul Williams made.
Yeah.
What was that?
Is there anybody I'm missing, Gil?
Yeah. Here's a deep cut one that nobody gets. Brent Minnie is based on Brian Eno. Brent Minnie is the...
Really?
Well, I'm getting to it. Brent Minnie is Brian Eno, because he does that tape music thing.
Yeah.
And then the other person is Norm Minnie. Norm Minnie worked with Phil Dick at the record store. He was fired for when a woman came into the store and asks for a record by the Kunstweil Orchestra. Norm Minnie said, "Is that the all women's orchestra?" And he was fired for that. He eventually married Cleo Minnie after she divorced Phil to go with Anne in Point Reyes. Norm Minnie was a total badass. He went to jail because he was protesting in the 50s. Cops threw a tear gas grenade into their crowd. He threw it back at them. And so he went to jail for that for some time. Real interesting guy. Died of cancer right around the time this novel was written. Tore Phil apart. He was close to Cleo and Norm at that time. And the real interesting other story is that they had a daughter, Cleo and Norm, named Anne, who was about that age, who is absolutely convinced in real life she's that child in the novel, and that she was the inspiration for the cover art that has a picture of a kid a young dark-haired girl on the cover. Most people think she's off her nut, but she seems, to my mind, to have a
good case
to be like Phil, to like to tell different narratives a lot. But I know Ann Minnie quite well. She and I went to Harvard to talk about Phil in like 2010 or something like that. She's a real character. So anyway, that's the deep cut. Another person in there.
And Mother Goose is obviously.
Did Eno do the music for Man Who Fell to Earth or whatever?
I don't think so. Who did?
Well, the musician Mother Goose is, I think, supposed to be like David Bowie, although he does mention David Bowie offhandedly around it. But
I thought it was David Bowie, but
yeah.
So it's interesting. I don't think that they were ever able to connect with David Bowie the way that they were able to connect with Eric Clapton.
All right, so the different themes of the book that I have are life events and autobiography, which we'll get to.
I think we talked about.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about them. There's just a couple ones in the book that I want to specifically. Zebra and the Pink Beam.
We talked about, well, not Zebra, but
God stuff, and then the ego, and sloth. I don't know how to pronounce that. Slophism or anyways.
Solipsism.
Solipsism.
I mean, this is a totally solipsistic novel.
Yeah.
And it's one man inside his own head the whole time. So.
Okay, so the first life event really in the book that gets a lot of the page time is on page 11. We get a lot about the Vancouver trip, which we don't need to go deep into because we've talked a lot about the Vancouver trip.
Yeah, we've talked about that.
And if you don't know about the Vancouver trip, listen to our Scanner Darkly episode. We talk a lot about it. We don't need to go into it, but it's there, and it's one of the things. But I will say, for me, when you're talking about how powerful the novel is in the beginning, Gil, one of the reasons why it doesn't work for me is because this took me out of the novel completely, because it's where I start to look and say, is this real? Is this not real? What is he saying here? And it really took me out of the novel. And I think I liked the novel more when I read it, not knowing about Phil's life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Oh yeah, it ruins the novel to know how it's based in the. No, absolutely. Although I get a sense for what his, how miserable he really was when he was working on all of that. That's what's real there. Is that it's a good.
Yeah, and so
thing of his.
I don't think it was ruined by knowing about him. It was for me it was more enhanced.
Okay.
Because, knowing where he came from and knowing that he's full of shit. I mean, I think the more you know Phil as a person, when you read about him, he's full of shit. So it helps to know that he's full of shit when he's doing this novel. Because nothing can be, taken as at face value, right?
He tells you Horselover is full of shit, and that's where you're supposed to buy into it. But then the whole thing is Horselover's right about everything.
Yeah,
like Horselover convinces.
No, but only. Right. About
the Freudian slip for me is that VALIS is just one letter removed from valid. And it seems like a really long treatise to get somebody to say, "Oh yeah, it's a valid."
Well, I think one of the worst things about the novel is that Horselover and Phil K. Dick agree. That's one of the worst things.
He wins over Philip K. Dick really quickly.
Yeah, if you're familiar with Peter Schaefer's work, the Equus, and Amadeus, it's all about that dichotomy, that discordance between someone totally out there, talented in some way, different from everyone else, and someone that's ordinary. And I felt like that's what was missing here, was Phil should have been ordinary and Horselover way out there, and that there would be a discordance there. But instead, it's Phil just agreeing with everything Horselover says. It really didn't drive a narrative.
Yeah.
But do you think that's because Horselover validates a lot of the thoughts that he was really conflicted by?
Well, that's why I call it solipsistic, is because he's just agreeing with himself the whole time. Like, oh yeah, you're saying that thing. It must be true. So, like, to me, it's just someone stroking their own ego the whole time.
I did say this was Dick's most navel-gazing novel in our group chat.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah.
Well, but
so-
you know, but in the 16, 17, 1800s, they thought navel gazing was ridiculous waste of time. Then Freud comes along, and they're like, you know what? If you actually reflect on yourself and what you're doing, you might not be an asshole for the rest of your life. You know, so.
Oh, absolutely. But I think that Dick does it to such an excessive point in this book that I got real tired of hearing about it.
That's interesting.
But I think
there's no doubt that the breaking into the tractates and the language from the exegesis is really off-putting to a lot of people.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to note that, you know, the anger that's being expressed towards religion here was in the zeitgeist at the time. And Dick was really flying in the face of conventional knowledge and really making himself, you know, I mean, Ursula Gwyn's wondering what happened to Phil Dick. Is he going crazy in Southern California? You know, people are like, are going, this guy's, you know, not like, oh, it's kind of cute and wacky and weird. That's like, oh, this guy's lost it.
This guy has some problems.
So that's a really interesting, I mean, so if ultimately it's about ego and there's this way in which he's going to enrich himself, make himself more popular, more powerful, ass backwards.
Yeah, right.
Right.
and like I think going back to what David was saying about the first, for me, this is the first time I've ever read this book, and I think that my enjoyment of it actually did come in the middle to the rest of the book forward, because the first 55 pages or so were rough. It was rough for me, mostly because I don't really care that much about philosophy and different religious terminology.
Yeah, I'm so curious about that. Like, what is your disconnect with the philosophical and religious?
And nothing outside of the fact that it's just not super interesting to me as a human being. It's that simple. So a lot of the exegesis,
he's talking about going to a funeral and going to his car and laying down because he couldn't bear it. And how this stupid guy who is an idiot put flowers on the grave, and at least that was something.
Yeah,
you know. And there was.
There's moments in the first 50.
So there's no. I don't remember any philosophy in the first 50 pages.
Oh no, there's tons of the exegesis in there.
I mean, well, yeah, but I mean, it's like
you can't ignore those words.
But do you think it gets heavier throughout the book then, David? Gill, not David.
I don't think so. I think it starts off heavy and it kind of like it gets lighter. More problematic as more characters get involved.
But I think it gets.
Sorry, I should have clarified my question. More heavy on the exegesis stuff. More heavy with the philosophy.
Okay. Yeah. Oh yeah, it definitely does.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe I don't know. Maybe I'm just not in the right mind state to read this book. But it took me, like I said, it took me a while to get into it. And the second half, I think I enjoyed more because of where we're at in the podcast and because we've done this and because I've learned a lot about Dick through all of David's research.
That moment when they go into the movie and figure out all that stuff like is legit, and then it becomes an adventure, that was really exciting. Of course, he nipped that in the bud.
Especially because I agree with David Gill. I think you said this earlier. This really feels like the book Dick has always wanted to write. It's an amazing blend of literature and science fiction. Whether or not it resonated with me is a kind of a moot point, but I do think it's the book he's always wanted to write.
You put that better than I did. Thank you, Anthony.
But I don't think it's well written.
Well, for instance,
I disagree.
I had to take my mom to a doctor's appointment this week, and we were waiting in the car, and I was reading some of this, and I just read her a couple of passages, and she's read a bunch of this stuff. I made her read it, and she's like, he's a really good writer. And it was all this stuff about, you know,
well, no,
it was about the Pyrrhic victories. Once you start looking for Pyrrhic victories, that's all
I had that quote.
Oh, my God,
David,
man.
Agronoff.
Yes.
I think it's just not well plotted.
Huh.
I think it could be plotted way better. like where the action actually makes sense and things happen in an order that makes sense.
Sure.
Like, to me, he like reneges on every promise throughout this whole.
I have a question.
He reneges on every promise.
Okay.
Does every book? But hold on, David. Does every book need a plot per se? Because
at least one of his books should.
This.
Well, I would argue it's plotted to convince you that all this stuff really happened, and that's the central concern of the plot, and not pushing the story forward.
Yeah,
it's not plotted as a story. It's plotted as I'm gonna
as a dialectic, basically.
Yeah. I would use the word rhetoric, right? It's designed to persuade
it's rhetorical,
you. Yep. Which is something that Dick is super afraid of. Naturally afraid of as a convention.
So the part you're talking about, Gill, is on page 26 of the Sci-Fi Masterworks edition, and it's where he's talking about actually writing the exegesis. And he said, the exegesis Fat labored on month after month struck me as a Pyrrhic victory, if there ever was one. In this case, an attempt by a beleaguered mind to make sense out of the inscrutable. And that's him talking about writing the exegesis. He also, obviously, page 23, talked about Christopher's illness. And he also goes into, as far as life events, and then we can move into.
Well, can we talk about Christopher's illness for a while? Like, isn't there something there? Like,
yeah. So now that's what I want to know.
Like, obviously he didn't like just come up with a diagnosis. There had to be some background there.
Tessa told me that the doctor had mentioned something beforehand.
Yeah.
It wasn't something he came up with. It couldn't have been.
Well,
that
is
God told him.
Tessa talks about this in the VALIS Incident.
Right, when he was high on sodium pentothal and seeing bright lights.
No, this was a different time, though. But this was after.
Yeah.
It was after. And then he supposedly told.
That was the fish.
He told her that he was speaking in tongues, that Christopher, the baby, was speaking in tongues, which is funny.
Well, babies always speak in tongues. I mean, that's
sort of, yeah.
When they first talk.
So one thing that's interesting too is that the doctor apparently, and this is in our VALIS Incident episode, so I don't want to go into too much, and it's all there. But once they gave him the diagnosis, they said you can't let the baby cry because it'll strain him too much. So they had to keep Christopher happy like constantly for like 2 or 3 months. And Tessa said that she didn't sleep at all for a long time, and they, in her words, had one spoiled gonad kid, as you put it. But
my understanding is that the kid was always cranky, and that the doctor told him it was a diaper rash, and that then at some point they took him back, and then this hernia was discovered.
Yeah.
But I don't buy for a second that Phil Dick had a vision about it, and there's no corroborating evidence in anything that he did.
Yeah, and it appears whether she, either Tessa's playing along with it, or like she corroborates a lot of the story. And
well, I mean, Tessa does enjoy a good story. I mean, she is.
Yeah, she's a storyteller and a writer as well.
Yeah, for liking a good story. So.
Yeah, and so page 54 is where we have this science fiction talking to him, and the first mention of fake novels, which we have the Android Cried Me a River novel,
yeah, right.
Which is interesting because later in the novel he just goes to mentioning his own novels and not making up fake ones. So
yeah, and like footnoting them as well.
And so this,
which I found weird. Why would he footnote the publication dates?
To corroborate, it's a corroborating evidence.
Yeah. So this whole the Empire Has Ended thing, the Divine Madness of PKD has a lot more material on this. It's page 136 of Divine Madness of PKD if people really want to look.
How many books do you have in front of you right now?
3. Just Sutton, Divine Madness, and VALIS. But my PKD shelf is right here, so I can reach back if I need to. but this whole and he mentions here it says Astoundings plural instead of Astounding magazine.
Right. I thought that was funny.
Yeah, he makes reference to.
I have no idea what you're talking about. Astoundings? No way.
Yeah. And but so this is the idea that the science fiction has always been kind of communicating with him. And the Black Iron Prison concept, which it's funny because I know a lot of people are really into this, but that's this idea that there is this. Well, anyways, the Black Iron Prison is written about extensively in the Divine Madness. I'm not a big fan of the theory, but I know some people really.
So what is the theory?
Oh, jeez. So the idea is that there is this.
Is this a Gnostic theory, or is this of Phil K. Dick's?
This is a Phil K. Dick thing. This is the idea that the Roman Empire
never ended.
Is
that thing?
Yeah. And,
okay.
Time stopped progressing in 40 AD.
Yeah, okay, that's that bullshit. All right, got it. That's all I need to hear.
And
so,
then,
David, I want to know what makes this the best.
Well, I think Anthony put it so well. It is Dick's literary vision throughout his entire career to match and merge highbrow fiction, literature, and science fiction, to write about himself, to put himself on the page, to play with the fourth wall, and it's so powerfully personal. I mean, and you get stuff into Android's Dream of Electric Sheep about Deckard doesn't know this or doesn't know that, but that stuff about laying down in the car at the funeral is so, or the collecting the pills so that she could get so many so she could kill her. I mean, that stuff is. He wanted to punch people with his emotional stuff, and I just think it's so good, and it so powerfully combines all of his energies. Now,
do you think he carries that throughout the entire novel, or just in that first half?
That's the problem. I have a hard time once I get past chapter 6, but I do think that the way he's able to then create a kind of a MacGuffin, for lack of a better word, and to have the Rhipidon Society going after it's not bad, and to see his friends and all of that kind of stuff. I really like the Mother Goose and that ending. I like it all. So I really think it's the best. But I think Three Stigmata and Androids are up there too. It's not bio.
Yeah, it's not far above some of his best, but I mean, I loved some of the conventions in this. I love the splitting of the characters, how he does treat them as himself for a while, and then at a certain point in the book, like Fat becomes his own person, and then is enveloped back into PKD, and then once another tragedy happens, boom, he's right back there. I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that was one of the best things in the novel, is that he creates this character that is him, and then lets it be its own character, and then kills that character, and then brings it back. It has just a wide range of meanings in there,
and I think that
like a resurrection, that kind of thing. And
the other thing I want to say is that it's not just about the granular details of spirituality; it's about the deep emotional needs that prompt them. Right. And so it's not just about like this belief system or that belief system, but how and why we need to believe.
Right.
And what that provides for us.
But he is incredibly pedantic about it. I mean, I sat here reading the book and looking up every name, every word, everything he came up with, and everything he said had some basis in history, in reality. Like, even calling Dionysus Dionysus.
Right.
I mean, that has a basis. I mean, it's not just like saying it just to say it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Plus, if you're a literary scholar and you're interested in the life and work of an author, man, and they drop something like this in your lap,
Yeah, that's basically
boy, it's the Rosetta Stone.
Yeah,
you know? So there's no doubt I add some enjoyment out of the utility of it.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah,
as a novel,
I will agree with that.
I just don't find it's so close to hitting, but it doesn't hit.
That's interesting.
Yeah. One thing that I wanted to note on page 99, there's I'm just going to read a quick part. Driving back to the modern 2-bedroom, 2-bath apartment in downtown Santa Ana, a full security apartment with a deadbolt lock.
I love that
building with an electric gate, underground parking, closed-circuited TV scanning of the main entrance.
Magnetic card for the
where he lived with Sherry next door. That is, if people want to go see it, it is 408 East Civic Drive, apartment C1, which we showed the picture earlier. And
I was a half a mile away from it yesterday.
Were you?
Yeah,
it was.
And yeah, you can take it's a 5-minute walk from the train station in Santa Ana, apparently.
Well, where were we when we went to Santa Ana? We were at that museum, and then we went to get a meal at that.
Yeah, we went by one of the other places he lived at, not that one.
Was it close to there or?
No, it's further, is more towards the train station. But so he also talks about living on the top floor and looking down on all the poor people. And the neighborhood is decidedly nicer these days than it was then. So there's that. And then,
yeah, but it's totally not the apartment he wrote in the novel, because the apartment he wrote in the novel was like a guarded building that is right on the street right there.
No, there's a courtyard there.
So yeah, even if there's a courtyard, that's not like the high-rise all glassed in building he wrote about in the novel, and security and all that stuff.
Yeah, there's a plaza and there's a front gate. I've looked at it on maps online, so it is the one.
I don't know what that has to do with writing.
Okay. Anyway,
what you saw doesn't make it reality in the novel.
Okay, so if you want
the novel, the condo where he died is the one that's being described in the novel with all the security.
It does sound, yeah. So
if people are interested, by the way, in the Man Who Fell to Earth stuff and the Mother Goose stuff, that's on 155 and 156 of the Masterworks edition. Now there is another deep cut character mentioned.
So is that the when they go and watch the movie?
Yes, on 155. Yeah.
To me, that was the best part, was the movie. Like I loved the way he portrayed that movie. It was like all this intrigue and like subliminal messages. I want to see a movie like that. I mean, we have movies that come close to that, like Seven maybe, or I don't know, Fight Club, things like that like have those moments in them. But this seemed like a movie just chock full of subliminal messages and little hints at what's really going on. Like, I want to see that movie.
Sure.
And it definitely wasn't the Bowie, the Man Who Fell to Earth.
So on page 168, where he mentions Do Androids Dream and Three Stigmata, there's also a deep cut there where they're talking about who's that producer friend of yours, the one at MGM, and he says Stan Jaffe. Yeah. As we recall, Stan Jaffe is the one who wrote the script for Do Androids Dream that he hated so much that he threatened to beat him up.
Well, he uses a different name for him, right?
Yeah. Well, he uses the same last name, Jaffe, but he wasn't Stan Jaffe.
I thought it was Joffrey.
Oh, okay. Yeah, it might be. Well, anyways,
actually,
he's obviously
I have it in here somewhere.
He's obviously making a reference to the guy who did the Do Androids Dream.
Yeah, that's a good deep cut. That's nice.
And then on the next page, there's a mention of the pink light on 169, by the way. And then I think on page 188, and that's the last of the character or a lot of the life experiences is that's where he like works his agent into it and starts talking about, he says Mr. Galen. He makes a direct reference to Galen, his agent, on page 189. So and as far as Zebra and the pink laser beam, the first time that's mentioned is page 21 of the novel. And that is, yeah, the first time he talks about, like, he said it was easy, he said, to describe the pink beam of light. That's the first time it's mentioned. The pink beam of light gets a lot of details in The Divine Madness on page 124, if people want to look into that. I, again, recommend that book. It's very good.
We should also mention that the pink beam experience is very similar to the experience of a guy named Jacob Burma, who lived in the 1600s. I'm reading from the his Wikipedia here. Burma had a number of mystical experiences through his life, culminating in a vision in 1600 as one day he focused his attention on the exquisite beauty of a beam of sunlight reflected in a pewter dish. He believed this vision revealed to him the spiritual structure of the world, as well as the relationship between God and man and good and evil. At the time, he chose not to speak of his experience openly, preferring instead to continue his work and raise a family. So that's a parallel that Dick is clearly drawn on as well.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've never heard of that guy.
Okay, well, the problem is his name, it's pronounced Burma, but it's spelled B-O-H-M-E. Jacob,
okay.
Jakob, Bohme.
Is he German?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and he's profound influence on German idealism and German romanticism. And this is what Ted Hand's scholarship is super into, is like these alchemy connections to Dick and the occult and all this kind of stuff. So they're who turned me onto this stuff.
Page 77 is where he defines Gnosticism. That in Gnosticism, man belongs with God against the world. In the
I can define Gnosticism. There's a stupid God, and then there's a God above that's smart. That's it. That's Gnosticism.
And
it's not a fucking. You don't need to be a genius to understand it.
But like if you're on Facebook or you're into some of these, there are lots of online groups that are Gnostic Christians that are using Phil Dick's stuff as their scriptures,
as proofs of certain points and stuff like that.
Well, yeah, as documents in their own metaphysical searches or whatever. It's wild.
I want to say that Dick on page same copy as yours, David, 172, page 172. Dick actually explains what he's doing in this whole novel right here. He says, what Kevin copped to was that all along he had taken it for granted that Fat was simply crazy. He had seen the situation this way. Guilt and sorrow over Gloria's suicide had destroyed Fat's mind, and he had never recovered. Beth was a tremendous bitch. And married to her out of desperation. Fat had become even more miserable. At last, in 1974, he had totally lost it. Fat had begun a lurid schizophrenic episode to liven up his drab life. He had seen pretty colors and heard comforting words, all generated out of his unconscious, which had risen up and literally swamped him, wiping out his ego. In that psychotic state, Fat had flailed around, deriving great solace from his encounter with God. That's basically him defining what this novel is about. Is just some dude that freaks the fuck out.
Kevin is converted too.
Yeah, well, he's not only converting Kevin, but he's telling us that he's just a guy that freaked the fuck out.
Yeah, but then I think Kevin comes around to maybe there's something to what Fat is saying.
which is one of the reasons why Jenner probably didn't like, because he probably felt like he didn't come around.
Because it's buying into a delusion. If you have a strong friend like that becomes deluded, inevitably people will glom onto that delusion. I mean, he talks about it. Jonestown is exactly what he's talking about himself doing, is becoming this, like, I'm all fucked up, and now you're all believing what the delusion that I got from being fucked up. So,
but Jeter
comparing himself to Jonestown.
But they really did go to The Man Who Fell to Earth. I think Jeter and Powers first, and they were like, "Holy fuck, this is all that crazy shit that Phil Dick was telling us about." And then they were like totally blown away. Like, wait a minute, there are three-eyed aliens in this thing. There is like a pot. There's like all this there's like water and desert or whatever.
Yeah.
Confirmation bias is the obvious explanation, but like the thing about it is, like, it's not, they really did. They were like,
well, let me tell you a story. In college, my friend wrote a story about this guy that ends up in a virtual world, and he wakes up from that virtual world, and then he has wires and stuff, and he's in this tank, and he's got all these wires and stuff connected to him.
Yep.
And he pulls a wire out of his...
Is your friend Bruce Sterling?
Out of his dick. And it's he then goes on and has this adventure. It's the same color scheme, the same exact scene that is in The Matrix. I mean, and it's like, this shit happens all the time. I wrote a script that has been copied 1,000 times over the past couple of years about an evil Santa Claus. I mean, like, that shit happens all the time. It's not fucking... It's not magical.
But
when are you going to share that?
But that's not the dialogue they were having.
Haven't read that?
They're like, oh, this shit happens all the time. We shouldn't flip out about it. They were like, holy cow, did you see all that shit in the movie that was straight out of this weird dude's ideas?
Yeah. Right.
I don't know. By the way, it started pouring
it's just that
here.
we're more cynical. It's a more cynical time, and we don't look at that kind of magic, anymore. And maybe that's something we should appreciate about the novel, is that it does hold that magic, that magic of innocence,
right?
Like, it's not coincidence. There's meaning behind things.
Well, look, page, on another note, with Zebra gets first mentioned on page 70.
Let's get back to quotes.
Sorry.
Come on, man.
Zebra gets mentioned on 78 and 79, which is the kind of the creature or the thing that he's communicating with behind the...
To me, that I read that as the higher god.
The higher god, yeah.
The Gnostic higher god.
Right. And again, I'm going to bring up Divine Madness. There's a lot of talk about Zebra in this book. A lot more, actually, than...
Well, how does that book define the zebra?
Well, hold on. Give me a second.
The zebra is the creature whose habit is in the nature of concealing itself. Right. That's the whole thing about zebras.
Yeah.
Like
it conceals it.
Never find it.
It doesn't show.
Yeah. The act of looking for it camouflages it.
It affects humanity. It affects the world and the universe, but it doesn't like to be seen doing it.
Yeah, or it's I don't know about that, or it's like, I guess it is trying to override the shitty gods, bad programming.
Yeah, right.
So in Divine Madness,
basically.
In Divine Madness, it says, Dick increasingly detected a spiritual presence in his physical environment. He noticed one out of the corner of his eye and caught glimpses of an entity observing him and Tessa. It camouflaged itself so as to blend with any surrounding, hence Dick's nickname for it, Zebra. In an exegesis entry describing zebra, he writes, "It can enter anything inanimate or inanimate, animate or inanimate. In the latter, it takes volitional control of casual processes, mimicry, and camouflage. Sometimes zebra blended into inanimate objects. Dick told Tessa that the entity had a third eye in the middle of its forehead, but it remained closed. If the entity opened its third eye, Dick felt its enemies would detect and kill it.
Yeah.
Characterized as a false god, a humanoid life form, Christ and the Holy Spirit. Zebra was paranoia turned inside out."
Normal stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, the usual.
Your usual thing that you
All right,
see.
so Anthony has to go in a bit. We should get to final judgment just so we can make sure we do that. Yeah?
Yeah.
Agreement?
Sure.
I can push it to 3 if that helps.
That helps. Yeah, because I'm almost done with the stuff from the book. Okay.
Can we just talk about the book?
It is. It's stuff from the book.
Well, what do you got?
Page 205 of this edition is where he starts to get into science fictional concepts that, kind of mirror Radio Free. And to me,
we haven't read Radio Free yet, so I'm not going to know what you're talking about.
Well, I haven't read it yet either. But what I'm saying is,
what are we talking about it for?
Because he mentions Album Youth. He mentions it. It's
yeah. He says the planet, right? It's a planet or a race.
That's an inter-system communications network. It stretches between stars, connecting all the star systems with.
But they say they're Albumuthians or something.
Right, and that's why I was bringing it up, because this is where it gets more science fictional, and it's interesting because the reason why I wanted to bring it up is it kind of flies.
It's actually not science fictional. It's actually they're Cyclops, which is according to Dick is a misdefinition of the third eye, is the single eye. So they're called Cyclops or something like that, but it's actually the Greek myth of Cyclops.
But in relation to what Gill was saying about how the book is engineered to make you believe in what he's laying down, right?
Okay.
This is where I feel like he gets a little bit weirder. And so this is the only thing that I think kind of goes against that theory, in my opinion.
Oh, I see. I see what you're saying.
So because it does get a little trippy and weird, and he is borrowing ideas from another book that he didn't think was going to get published, at least I believe so, because I haven't read it yet, because I'm saving it for podcast.
Till we have to read it.
But it seems to me like he's just knowing that Phil.
Do you think he's actually purposely making a reference to the other book?
No, because I don't think, like Gill said, I don't think he thought it was ever going to get published. Because at this point, he hadn't agreed to do the revisions, and Bantam had basically said no to it until
So you're saying that this section is in? I think he
borrowed concepts from Radio.
Okay.
And put it here in this part, whereas it's a much bigger part of that story, if I'm correct, but I haven't read it yet. So
right.
So it's just my theory. But he mentions it, and then therefore that's where you get into the issue of, is it a trilogy? Isn't it a trilogy? Radio Free?
Is there a fourth? Yeah.
Is Radio Free an actual part of a trilogy, because he didn't really intend for it to be published at that point, because he'd given up on it being published?
I still just can't see Dick not wanting something he wrote to be published.
I'm sure he was fine.
He has 15 books that shouldn't have been published.
Well, a lot of those came out after he died.
But no. A lot of those came out because he needed money.
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm
talking to you, crack in space.
Yeah, well,
Cosmic Puppets came out while he was alive. I'm gonna say it again for the 800th time.
yeah.
That was early days. He didn't know what he was doing.
All right, so all right, are
Back in
there any?
space, he knew what he was doing.
He should have been, but Crack in Space was also written during the December 63 to April 64, where he wrote 5 books in like that many months.
So in Divorcepedia, it says he quit. He started doing amphetamines in 68. And then quit in 7.
No way.
That's what it says in Divorcepedia.
No, Cleo's father,
But he was doing,
doctor,
he was doing benzos and stuff like that in the early 60s. Like everybody did that shit in the early 60s. So
he was doing amphetamines from the mid 50s through 71.
Because he was part of that whole beat scene, like you said. And the beats loved the amphetamines.
December 63 to April 64 was his most prolific period, short period.
He was definitely high during those times. Right?
Yeah, and he was moving in and out of the house with Anne and back and forth to his mom's house in Berkeley.
Yeah.
So he was like, he was high as a kite. But so anything else on?
So do we think he was high doing any of this, or was he sober?
No.
Do we think Do we think he was ever sober, like sober?
Yeah, he was sober for a lot of this. He was not on amphetamines after 72. His body couldn't handle him anymore.
Okay.
He smoked an occasional joint. He did mescaline once, but that's it. After the 60s.
Yeah.
So like most of us, he had his time doing drugs and then gave it up.
Yeah, this is post Scanner Darkly, so yeah.
But it's pretty clear he's got amphetamine psychosis, from my perspective. Both William Gibson and I think he's got amphetamine psychosis.
And the amphetamine psychosis is like the main argument of this book. This book is like 160 pages of its amphetamine psychosis.
Yeah. Well, which again, like, notice how the thoughts are really narcissistic and like, oh, God's in touch with me, blah blah blah. But the flip side of that is, oh my God, the Xerox missive, they're gonna come and kill me. This is what I wrote my master's thesis on, the way paranoia and narcissism are matched, right? If somebody's after me, I must be important enough for them to expend all these resources.
Right, but it all boils down to narcissism.
Yeah. Well, doesn't it for us sitting around on a podcast on a Sunday afternoon, sitting around pronouncing our judgments on Phil Dick boil down to narcissism too?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, but it's not it's not pathological. I don't spend.
Oh no, that's
well, maybe not for some of us.
It's absolutely pathological.
Yeah, come on, Larry.
All right,
I know it's not. At least it's not pathological.
All right, so anything before final judgments on themes, ideas that you?
Because just like I was saying earlier about really feeling like this is the book Dick always wanted to write, I also felt like he really encapsulated himself in this part on page 245, where he's having this conversation with Fat. Essentially, he's talking to himself, right? Go away, Fat, I said. Go to South America. Go back up to Sonoma and apply for residence at the Lambtons commune, unless they've given up, which I doubt. Madness has its own dynamism. It just goes on. Getting to my feet, I walked over and stuck my hand against his chest. The girl is dead. Gloria's dead. Nothing will restore her. Sometimes I dream. I'll put that on your gravestone. I think that really spoke to me of like the dichotomy of Dick, and just how he spends his whole life essentially writing some of this brilliant surreal fiction, but also kind of struggling with, how he sees the world and just being a person. And sometimes I get the impression he doesn't like all the daydreaming and all like being kind of haunted by writing. And I just thought that really, I don't know, that passage just really spoke to me as being very clear about himself.
Right.
Really what I'm trying to get at here.
Oh, that's a really good quote. Yeah. And I didn't have that highlighted. So, yeah, good job.
I just want to say quickly before I do our final judgments, if you're a fan, you should listen to Sonic Youth's album Sister. It's all about, inspired by Phil Dick and this whole thing. It's got a song called Stereo Sanctity that even uses lyrics from the novel in it. And it's a great album and a great connection.
Like Sonic Youth has a bad album.
Well, yeah, I know. That's my dream. That was one day to write a 33 and a third book about the album Sister and the connection to Phil Dick.
Nice.
Yeah. Oh, that would be awesome. I want to read that.
I did want to compare this a little bit to The Great Gatsby.
Okay.
I feel like, I compared it to Equus and to Amadeus, but I also feel like there's a good comparison to The Great Gatsby because it is sort of like a love letter and also a hate letter to himself. In the same way that, what's his face regards Gatsby, it's the same way he regards Horselover Fat. And that's a quick aside.
Like it's all like we're all just narcissistically creating these worlds in a fallen tomb world where nothing matters.
Yeah, where we're also the greatest and nothing at all. So it's really sort of he's doing that, following that same pattern in this novel until he kills Horselover and
one other important
Messiah
point is at the end of the novel here he's waiting for the next Messiah, and in like right before he died in 81 or 82, Dick had another vision about this kid named Tagore. And it was a kid who lived in the third world, and he had chemical burns all over his body. It's a really deeply environmentally prescient thing. Mm. And he wrote what's called the Tagore letter about his vision, and he sent it out to all kinds of people, like everybody on his contact list and then some, about how this kid's the savior and this is what we need to do.
It was a Rolodex back then.
He did have a Rolodex back then. So anyway, that's if you're wondering, like if at the end of the novel you're feeling a little bit of like, well, what happens next? What happens next is like, a bunch of years later he has another vision and he thinks he's got it, and then he dies.
Or Phil had a stroke. Yeah, or Phil had a stroke, which is really what happened next. But
that's too bad. I mean, in this novel he's talking about all these plans for the future. And we know for a fact that he dies the following year.
Well, no, that's after it's published. He wrote it in 70.
Yeah, I mean that after it's published.
Yeah.
So the first time someone read this, they were like, "Oh man."
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't know the first time, but
interesting.
I mean, to me, I had that sadness of knowing that the year this was published, he would die. Just mere months later.
Yeah. Well, we're definitely getting towards the end. So, but he did have.
Now, is this the last one that was published before he died?
No, I think Divine Invasion came out.
Divine Invasion? Okay.
Yeah, and then he wrote the Timothy.
I'm pretty sure he wrote all of them before he died.
Yeah, pretty sure.
Except for the third VALIS novel, which would be The Owl in Daylight. Transmigration doesn't fit in the trilogy. And we're waiting for the third book of the trilogy. That's my take.
Yikes.
Yeah. So here's the thing. Since Anthony needs to go, let's get his final judgments, and then we can finish up. But Anthony, what's your final judgment on VALIS?
Judge.
I think I was judge. Yeah. I think I've been pretty open about how I felt about this book. I think it is absolutely the book Dick has always wanted to write. I think it blends everything I've seen him do well in different books into one book. Did it work for me? Yeah, those first 54, 55 pages were really rough for me to get through for some reason. But with that said, I like a lot of things, you see a movie for the first time, or you hear a song or a whole album and you're like, what the fuck is this? I don't like this. And then you start thinking about it, and then you revisit it and you're like, actually, that's actually pretty good. it's like me listening to Mr. Bungle for the first time, and I was like, this is all noise. And then you start thinking about other aspects of the musicianship and what really worked and what they're actually going for. And I think I'm of two minds about it. The me that just wants to read a book and enjoy it is like, this was not interesting, or like it was just a slog. But taking a step back and looking at it from a different angle, and all the stuff we've kind of read and gone over since we started this podcast, I think it's probably like a 4 for me.
Wow. Wow.
With one exception. The whole like being bitter about somebody for dying on you from cancer and being mad at them about it really, really irritated me. And I've been pretty open on the show too, that I think Dick has a lot of issues with women that he works out through his fiction. And I texted you guys when I was like halfway through this going, I just feel like Dick was sitting there going, I can't believe that bitch died to spite me. And which is absolutely fiction. Not true, but
it was fiction as well. It didn't even happen, but he still wrote it that way.
But I think with what he was trying to do with this book and what I know of him as a writer, I think it's pretty damn good. And that's my final judgment.
Nice.
All right, Langhorne.
I wrote in my notes here that I really loved the narrative style. I loved the splitting of the characters. Like I said, I loved that whole idea of separating yourself and then that person becoming real and then re-inviting that person into you and then losing it again. When tragedy happens. I thought that was brilliant. I appreciated a lot of the religious stuff he put down. The Greek myth stuff, maybe not so much, because there's so much of it. I mean, Zeus had about like 350 kids, so it's a little much to try to understand all that stuff. The movie, the way he portrayed the movie and the characters watching the movie, I thought was fascinating. I thought it was finally becoming a novel. But the main problem I had is every promise is not fulfilled. He makes promises throughout this whole novel, like, oh, look, this exciting thing is going to happen. And then he balks on it. And he makes sure that exciting thing doesn't happen. It's sort of Dick's, I would call it an Achilles heel. Some people would call it a good style choice. But I say, anytime you promise to me that there's going to be like an adventure and there is no adventure, and you make a 2-year-old, if any of you picture a 2-year-old speaking in full sentences like Sophie does and isn't freaked out, you don't have an imagination. Because that kid should not have spoke like that. And no one should have been like, oh, yeah, take it in stride. Fuck it. Yeah, this 2-year-old. You know what 2-year-olds look like? Babies. And they do not speak that way. And if a 2-year-old spoke to me that way, I'd punch it in the throat.
You're punching 2-year-olds now?
I would punch a 2-year-old in the throat if it spoke to me that way. Anyway, so the I'm
precocious kids had tucked away, I guess.
I'm gonna give it a 3. I want to do 2.5. Glib 2-year-olds out of 5.
Oh, whoa! I wasn't expecting it to be that low. All right, so I'll go and then we'll do Gill last. But this book, it's interesting because I read it first like 20 years ago, and I had a really great experience reading it because at the time I understood to a certain degree that Phil was writing a meta narrative, and I thought it was interesting what was going on, but I did not know the details of his life. I did a little bit. Well, no, I take that back. I had read Sutton at that point, but I wasn't as immersed in it as I am now. Right, reading it this time, the immersion was a little much, and I was spending. It took me out of the thing. It shouldn't have, because I think he's trying to force. One of the things that Phil's doing is trying to force us out of the narrative, and so I think that's intentional. But in the end, I vacillated between 3 pink laser beams of truth or 4, and I'm going to go with 4 because I think what he set out to do, he accomplished. And the only thing is, I do think that there are some weaknesses. The only reason I can't give it a 5 is because of just how much I know about his life, and that's just my personal read on it. Is it a 5-star novel? It may be, but for me, it's a 4 for my personal feeling. But I do think as an experiment, Phil pulled off what he needed to. And most importantly, he needed to fulfill his commitment to Bantam, and he did that, right? David Gill.
I'm going to give it 4.5 stars because I don't think there's a perfect Phil Dick novel. They're by their nature, they can never be. That's a good thing. All right. The things I love about this novel, number 1, the dialogue. Everything from Scanner Darkly on in Dick's Irv has this unique conversational the capturing of conversations. Leatham at his keynote address at the 2012 Dick Fest I think it called it shit talking, essentially. Like the way in which all these characters are just shooting the shit. That's it. They're shooting the shit. I love it. It's the best dialogue in any Dick novel. The characters, I think Adam Gopnik, when he wrote his piece about Phil Dick in the New Yorker, said that Phil Dick's characters were like a bunch of old magician's rabbits that he'd pull out of these hats. Not in this novel. These are great, round characters with really a great depth to them. And I think that if you wanted to see what Dick aspired to as an author, this is the book to find it in. Not to say that it's, I guess it's maybe not the book to start with, because it's complicated. Lastly, I work at San Francisco State University in the English department, and I've made friends with a colleague there, a science fiction writer named Meg Shirky, who has a PhD in poetry, and who knows good literature in a way, frankly, that I don't. And over the past probably 5 years, I've been slowly feeding Meg different Phil Dick books, and this was the one she said it's the best. And so in some ways, I agree with her. I agree that it's the fullest realization of what he was attempting as an author. But if you're into sci-fi, you should probably read Do Androids Dream of Light? But I really enjoy it. It gives me a sense for Dick that I can't get anywhere else. It gives me a feeling of Dick that I can't get anywhere else. And so those are the reasons why I think it's so fantastic. But I'm by no means an unbiased observer in this. So I fully admit to wearing my biases on my sleeve.
Right. And I appreciate that. I do think overall, I think it as a novel, it says more about him than all the others.
There you go. That's a good.
All right, real quick, Anthony, movie, make it a movie.
Oh, geez. I don't want to. I don't think that this would translate well enough to be to film. I think that this should exist in the format that it's in. I think a film would not do it justice, especially depending on who the director is.
Well, they tried several times to make it a movie. So,
starring Paul Giamatti as Dick.
Yeah,
he plays R. Crumb writing about Dick.
I would prefer it just stay a book.
Yeah, now, but the assignment is if they forced us, they were like throwing a bunch of money at us and said, we'll let you make 3 Stigmata, but first you got to make VALIS. We would make VALIS. And,
no, David would write VALIS, and I would just edit the script. David can do all that.
Yeah, I think VALIS would be a hard one. It wouldn't be the top choice for me, but I think what you would have to do is you would have to make it a biopic, basically, and cut it down the middle of, you would have to have the person who's playing Phil also play Horselover Fat. You would have to look at how to portray that difference, and you would have to have the right director and actor and cast to do it. You'd want an actor and director, a team who was willing to dive into the material and dive into the exegesis, and an actor who is really game for
you guys are making a movie, right?
Yeah, I know, but making the contradiction or doing the the contradictions of Phil. Yeah, I think you could do it. I just think it would be weird. It would be hard to get money for it, but at the same time, it wouldn't cost anything because you could make it at a very reasonable budget. So,
I think you do it as a series, X-Files style, where the Rhipidon Society one mystery at a time kind of thing. It keeps getting deeper and deeper. First they find a few coincidences, then they see the movie, then and it just keeps building. And they just take it and go with it, run with it, and move away from the plot.
The group of the friends.
Yeah, the Rhipidon Society is the main. They're the main, and they each week is a different little adventure for them finding out stuff or whatever. I like that idea.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. Make it a series like that, like the old Friday the 13th kind of series. I personally would just do it as the adventure. You have a bunch of characters. You put them in that situation where they're finding God, and they go and find God. I would have Charlie Kaufman write the script and direct it.
Yeah. There you talk.
Because he could definitely do that Charlie Kaufman thing with the split characters and make it work.
All right, Anthony, before you go, do you have a dick-like suggestion?
You know the answer to that. The answer's no.
All right.
I'm out of here, guys. It was nice to see you, Gil. Take care.
Rock on.
I'll see you guys around.
Yep. All right. Love you, Anthony.
Love you.
All right. I do have a dick-like suggestion. Do you guys have dick-like suggestion, Larry?
I do, but you go first. I forgot about it, so I got to look it up.
So I have 2 dick-like suggestions, which are Virtual Zen by Ray Nelson. And the reason, obviously, I read it because of his passing, and it was his last novel. It was published in 1996, but it was clearly written in the late 80s because it includes jokes about Dan Quayle being the president. And so it's very clearly written in the late 80s. One of the things I like about this novel is about a guy who becomes extremely famous pop star playing a toy flute. And it is very clearly written by a guy who is not hip anymore, trying to write about a hip future. And I kind of love how anachronistic the coolness of it is. There are also very Philip K. Dick moments, like, people telling their doors to go screw themselves when they asked to be open, to open. Of course, Phil would have had the people not have enough money to get into the door. So Ray Nelson's Virtual Zen, it's also basically about AI music generation, which is a very hot topic now. And hot topic. Yeah, so in the novel, the son of a very popular artist is told that he has to inherit doing his dad's musical career because his dad dies. And then they're like, it's okay, we can generate through artificial intelligence all the music, you just have to show up and mini vanilla it. And so it's very hot topic. So that's Virtual Zen by Ray Nelson. And the cover is hilarious. And it was published by a short-lived Avon Publishing sci-fi line called Avon Nova. And yeah, so it's interesting. And then the other one is Galaxies by Barry N. Maltzberg. And the reason why I wanted to mention that here is because he does a very similar trick to VALIS in Galaxies. Galaxies is about a pilot of a starship in the 40th century who falls into a black hole and is communicating with a science fiction author telling her story, i.e. Barry Maltzberg, right? And this was republished recently by friend of the podcast, David Harlan Wilson's AOP, Anti-Opedius Press. So you can get a new edition of it. And I recently recorded a bonus or a episode of Postcards from a Dying World with Professor Wilson and James Reich, who wrote the foreword for it, talking about galaxies. So if you read it and then come over to that podcast, that'll be episode 101 of Postcards from a Dying World. So those are my two Dick-like suggestions. Langhorne.
Damn it.
Gil, do you have one? Well,
yeah, I got a couple. I'm going to recommend Bret Easton Ellis's Glamorama. I'm not going to recommend Bret Easton Ellis, but Glamorama is a really interesting novel that takes models and serial killers and kind of weaves them together over the course of the thing. The other one, there's two more. I probably mentioned these at other times I've been on the podcast, but one is the Future on Another Timeline, which is a recent sci-fi novel by Annalee Newitz about a group of girls who travel through time to stop evil patriarchal oppressors from the past, removing women's rights through the timeline. And it's wonderful the way in which it has all these details about time travel and ultimately revolves around the emotional details of the characters' lives. The last one is a mainstream novel called The Man in the Gray Flannel Suit that came out in the 1950s, which Cleo told me to read because it was a big influence on Phil Dick. And when I read it, I couldn't believe how much his style and his basic worldview were encapsulated there. It's a much more Hallmark happy ending kind of a novel, but the way in which the characters are described as washing dishes on the floors, kind of sagging and deteriorating, and there's entropy everywhere, is really relevant. So those are my three.
Nice.
Yeah. Nice. Good ones.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I can't find the one I was going to do, but I will do Doki Doki Literature Club. Which is a game that is about a literature club, literally. And it turns out that it's a meta game, and you are in a horror scenario with these characters. Some of them exist inside your computer. Some of them are not real. Some of them are real. You are real, and sometimes you're not real. And they have two versions. There's a free version, which is good enough, and they have a pay version which has more content in it. But you never know what's real, what's happening is real or not. You're either in a dream, out of a dream, in the game, or out of the game. You just don't know the whole time. And I think that holds the vibe of PKD's whole deal.
Awesome. That sounds interesting. Another game. Who would have ever thought it, Langhorne? All right, Mr. Tweed, thank you for your Dick-like suggestion. But I think with that, that's everything. Mr. Gill, what have you got going on in the hopper? You got your band playing any shows? Anything you want to...
Oh, my band, Dr. Monster's playing a show at San Francisco State on February 23rd. I think that's it. Not dick related, but we're dicks, so there's that.
And and we're going to encourage you to work on that biography or to work on
Ray Nelson, yeah, he's got to be proven wrong, right?
Yeah, right. Well, I think Sutton did a pretty good job, but you know,
But it legit can't be done, can it?
It's tough. It's
It's
a tough bio. I mean, it's easier than writing about somebody who's been dead for 400 years, to my mind.
I don't know.
Well, yeah, maybe it's harder, right? But there's more information.
Right? But it's all conflicting. So
yeah. Well, we want to encourage you to write that book, and thank you for joining us for VALIS.
Yes.
I think you gave some pretty awesome and valuable insights, so I really appreciate that.
yeah, this was a very interesting book, that's for sure.
Oh, I got to do the preview, right, for the next one since Anthony's not here. What's next, Larry?
Divine
The
Invasion.
Divine Invasion.
Oh, that's right, and I don't have that ready.
Pretty sure.
Yeah,
Right?
Yeah.
What if the Messiah were an illegal alien coming from another planet?
There. See? We did it.
Divine Invasion is the sequel to VALIS.
Exactly. Okay, that's better.
Number
than I
2
would've-
in the VALIS trilogy.
Yeah, book 2 in the VALIS trilogy that never totally
read it,
actually
David?
was meant to be a trilogy. But
Have you read it?
this will be my first time.
Because there's a lot of the Jew.
Oh wait, no. I did read it. I did read it after I read VALIS. And the funny thing is I listened to VALIS on audiobook the first time and then read Divine Invasions on paperback. And so it was a weird, surreal experience because I went from audio to...
Well, your interest in Jewish storytelling and all that kind of stuff that's probably its most finds its most realized form is in the Divine Invasion.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
All right, so on that note, we'll see everybody with Divine Invasions. Hopefully we won't have as much of a wait between episodes next time.
Yeah. Be paranoid.
Yeah, keep it paranoid. Stay paranoid.
All paranoid.